Good evening. It is Monday, March 9th, 2020. It is 7 p.m. I call to order the first meeting of the month for the Speedway Town Council. Joining me this evening are members of the council. To my far right, Councilor Gary Rakes.
Good evening.
To my immediate right, Councilor Dan Jensen.
Good evening.
To my immediate left, Vice President of the Council, Vince Noblet.
Good evening.
To his left, Councilor Eileen Fisher.
Good evening.
To her left, our Clerk Treasurer,
Good evening.
Jacob Blaisdell.
Good evening.
And our Town Attorney, Bob Clutter.
Howdy do.
Our agenda has been posted, which we will follow this evening. The first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. If everyone would please stand. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 2 on our agenda is approval of the minutes from our council meeting on February 24th. Those have been distributed. Any corrections or changes? Hearing none, those will be accepted as presented. Item 3 on our agenda is a request for a waiver of a noise ordinance for the Rev event on May 2nd at the Motor Speedway. And Mike Bates from the Motor Speedway is with us this evening. Good evening.
Thank you, Mr. President, council members. I appreciate the time. Just again, appearing, as you know, we have an annual event, May the 2nd, the Rev event, which is a huge fundraiser for IU Health and also the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, specifically the Infield Care Center. Supplies a lot of great medical equipment, things that are worn out. They get something new, and it's purchase free as a result of this event. So it's really a good one. So I'm just asking for basically a waiver to extend the noise ordinance until midnight on that one particular night. Have about 3,000 folks that come out to it every year, and again, I would assume, I believe some of you folks, council members, have been there, so it's really a good event. And I know it's a little bit of a stretch, but certainly we will shut it off at midnight, if not a little bit before midnight. But I know it does take a council as far as the approval from the folks from the council, so yeah, that's what we're here for. So just asking for that waiver if it's a possibility. We would certainly appreciate it on behalf of the Speedway.
Mr. President, I move that we approve the request for a waiver of noise ordinance as presented by Mr. Bates.
Second.
There's been a motion, a second, to approve the waiver of the noise ordinance on May 2nd. Any questions from the public? Hearing none, any questions or comments from the council?
Not a question, just a comment. It is a good event, and the noise is really not that loud when you get to the later hours. And so, but I appreciate their
Appreciate it.
following the procedure.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Hearing none, we'll then call for the vote. All those in favor of approving the waiver for the noise ordinance on May 2nd signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thanks to council.
Item 4 on our agenda is a public hearing, 2020 Zone-001, which is 6330 Debonair Lane, Wayne Township, Town of Speedway. It's Max Convenience Store LLC request rezoning of 25.575 acres from the CS and CSW5 districts to the CS and CSW5 districts. Sounds like I'm repeating myself, to provide an automobile fueling station. And we have someone from Max Convenience Stores to begin.
Yes, sir.
And allow me to make this official. We will open the public hearing at 7:04 p.m.
Sure, thank you, Mr. President, councilors. Michael Rabinowitz, 1 Indiana Square. I'm a land use attorney representing Max Convenience Stores here tonight. The representatives of Max here as well. The petition for rezoning that's before you concerns a roughly 2-acre parcel within the 25-acre project that known as the Founders Square development. Hit the first slide, please. The slides that should be on the screen also track what's in your materials. So if we don't tee that up, so the concept plan for Founders Square is in your materials at tab 2. But there on the screen you can see the 2-acre parcel that's part of that 25-acre tract. This may seem familiar to you because at least some of you approved rezoning of this entire tract back in August 2019 from the CS to the CS to permit a range of commercial uses, including the automobile fueling station use that we're talking about here tonight. The plan, I think all along, has been to relocate the existing Shell station that is just north of 25th Street. Next slide to the aerial, please. That you can see there to the south, back to the concept plan. If back to the south, so that 25th Street can run across into the development. I think what you properly recognized back in August of 2019 was that what we're proposing here is a substantial improvement and upgrade to what was there at the Shell station. Nonetheless, at that time, after the vote of this council to approve that rezoning of the entire 25 acres, because the city planning staff had some concern about this particular use, an agreement was reached between the Redevelopment Commission, who was then the petitioner, and Max to pull that piece out of the overall rezoning, separate it, and that's why we're here before you tonight. But again, it's essentially the same proposal that was before you in August of 2019. So our request tonight is just to rezone this 2-acre site from the CS to the CS to permit the Circle K convenience store and gas station to this location. If you could advance to the site plan. Next slide. Two more. There you go. So the slide now before you at tab 4 in the materials is the site plan overlaid over the aerial, and we've added some annotations to that because I wanted to make a couple of points clear. You can see that there is some overlap in the two parcels from the existing parcel, which is the triangular piece sort of to the north of the where the new location will be. And what we wanted to point out there is that all we are doing is relocating the old underground storage tanks from that Shell station to, it's really on the same parcel. And so brand new underground storage tanks will be located in that overlap area. These will be, as opposed to what was there, these will be brand new state-of-the-art underground storage tanks that have up-to-date safety and control mechanisms that meet all state and federal regulations. So what we are essentially doing is upgrading what was previously there. Next slide. So here's it's a little easier to see the site plan without the overlay over the aerial, but what we're proposing is a brand-new 5,200 square foot convenience store with a 7-pump island that's reduced from what was previously proposed because the planning staff had identified some current concerns about the intensity of that. So it's been reduced from 9 to 7. The site is access off of High School Road. It's a right-in, right-out, and also through the development. As for what we're considering here tonight, I just wanted to remind you that all we're considering is a rezoning from the CS to the CS to permit this use. With respect to the underground storage tanks, we will need to seek a variance to permit those to be located in the Wellfield Protection District, the 5-year Wellfield Protection District. And then actually in connection with the storage tanks, there's actually a third level of review, which is to have it reviewed by a technically qualified person or representative of the city to do that. Because the planning staff had raised some issues about the underground storage tanks, Circle K had engaged an expert to study those issues, and that report is in your materials at tab 7. Next slide, please. I've summarized the opinions that the expert has reached, and he is actually here, Richard Christensen. If you want to hear from him, you can, but those opinions are summarized there. Number one, a petroleum release from the proposed UST location would not affect the municipal well field. The proposed UST system design will incorporate state-of-the-art safety and control mechanisms. The town of Speedway Municipal Well Field will be protected from possible spill at the property, and the replacement USTs comply with the UST replacement exclusion under the ordinance. Next slide. I just wanted to real quick, I won't read these next items. I'm trying to move quickly, but there is an exclusion from the well field protection ordinance when there's no net increase in the volume of the tank, and that's exactly what we're proposing here. And they're upgraded storage tanks that have secondary containment, and all replacement or upgraded storage tanks shall be in full compliance with state and federal law and annual tightness testing. The point really of that is that what we're proposing is much improved from what was there. A couple final points. The approval we're requesting is, we're asking it be subject to the development statement, which we've submitted to you. And all that does is, this would be the only fueling station in the development, and it would be at this location. Can't be anywhere else, there can't be any more. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
How many tanks are in that facility? How many tanks, underground tanks are you
Will
putting
there
in?
be?
Yeah,
2, right? Two.
2? How many are they now? 4?
4, yeah. Same volume.
Okay. And what's the stormwater runoff of that area? Does that go into Eagle Creek? I don't know if you guys would know that, or,
Hi, I'm Rich Christensen with QD Environmental Solutions. The stormwater is actually going to be contained. It's going to be going directed into storm basins, and then there's an on-site retention pond.
okay, they'll be feeding into that pond?
Yes.
Okay.
The property that the tanks are in now, it's going to go within your boundary limits now? It's going to go within those same?
The tanks, if you look at that aerial, which is at tab 4, there's an arrow pointing to proposed tank location at kind of the northeast corner of the site plan. You see that?
Yes.
And so it overlaps in that shaded area, yeah.
So do you know where the northern limit is to the wellhead protection area that's currently in place?
We do. It's in your materials in the
Okay.
report.
It's in the map on
Want to
the,
identify?
Is that that red dotted line, or?
Now, if you go to tab 7, which is the acuity report, and you look at Exhibit D1, which is towards the back.
Okay.
There's an orange line, and that orange line is the 5-year time of travel. The closest production well is approximately 3,600 feet to the south of where the proposed tanks are at.
How many feet, I'm sorry?
3,600?
Can you describe what year the tanks are that were removed? You know what year those were, what the year those were installed?
82? 1982.
Okay. And I'm sure technology has improved with those since 1982.
Absolutely.
Yeah. They're self-contained, correct? Is that what he
Yes,
spoke to?
they're going to be double vaulted, is that correct?
Okay. And the ones that are there that we just
Were not
pulled out
vaulted.
were not? Okay. Any other questions from the council?
Just want to make a comment. When we heard this in August, a few of us were part of the council at that time, and one of the comments that at the time was that the existing tanks could actually be left where they are, and we could still use those tanks literally for as long as we want to, even as inadequate as they are today compared to today's standards. But yet, the new requirement with much better tanks is just a little bit further south from where the current tanks are located, are far better tanks, far better security, far better protection. But the older tanks could survive, but these new tanks, according to code, could not. And I just want to make it very clear, that's not logical at all. I think that's the reason this council voted to approve back in August.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you. And I believe now,
Ms. Blackham?
yes.
Yeah, sorry, remonstration?
Anyone from the public wish to come up and speak at this time?
Is that for or against? Is anyone at this point?
For or against, there's still time left, so if there's anybody in support,
Okay.
they could come up first.
Good evening, members of the council. My name is Tom Dickey. I'm Managing Director of Real Estate for Hageman Group. We're partnered with Rebar Development, and we're the developers on this site. I spoke at the meeting back in August to give a little context, and I thought I would do the same this evening. Many of you who have been on the council for years know this context, but I think it's important. This site has been a planned redevelopment site for the town of Speedway for a long time, which has included getting rid of the two old gas stations, the old Bigfoot to the north and then Circle K to the south. And even before developers were talking to the town about this, the town was talking about doing a land swap, getting rid of the two old gas stations, the old tanks, the old, no offense, the old looking buildings, just the old model, and replacing it with a newer model and newer tanks and newer safety technology for spills to the south. We got involved, and with the public-private partnership we had to redevelop the site, began talking directly to Circle K about acquiring the site and doing the trade, and that's all in the works. And I just wanted to point out that context, and also point out that one of the important things about timing was for Circle K to close that existing gas station to allow the town to get in there and do the 25th Street improvements and the stoplight and so forth is happening. And the Circle K team's been very cooperative on that to make that happen. And so we have been supportive of this from the beginning. When we learned about the well field issue, we had some of the same questions you all have had about, aren't the tanks just a few feet away from they were, aren't they better technology? And so we rise to support the petition and speak in favor of it.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak?
Good evening, Council. Tim Grupp, Director of the Speedway Redevelopment Commission. I don't want to rehash everything that was said, but just reiterate that we were supportive of this the first time through. We did take, with the approval of the Town Council, we took the CS rezone through this step all the way to the appeal that was down at the Metropolitan Planning Commission. We worked with the staff at Indianapolis to try to put extra caveats in to make sure that they were comfortable with extra precautions for safety and to make sure there was limit the risk of any kind of leaks that you could possibly have. We felt pretty comfortable going up to that meeting. It was just at the very last minute we chose not to risk the entire rezone over just this one issue and to come back and revisit it. So progress has been happening out there. This is a situation where we needed to put a road in and fix an intersection, Indianapolis intersection at 25th and High School with a stoplight that needs to be addressed. To do so, we needed the Circle K to move 200 to 300 feet to the south to accommodate that request. We think that's a reasonable request. We think the safety standards in place make sense, and we support this project and like to see it move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Kathleen?
Good evening.
Good evening.
I think
President Lindsay, members of the Town Council, Kathleen Blackham with the Department of Metropolitan Development, 200 East Washington Street, room 1842. You've heard what I said previously, and I'm not here to change what I said, so you're going to hear something similar to what I mentioned in the previous rezoning. And just, it's kind of confusing when you see a zone from a CS to a CS. What you're doing is adding a new use. That's why it's, as you said, as you're repeating. But when you rezone to CS, which is a commercial special, you identify specific uses that would be permitted. So if you want to introduce a new use, you have to rezone from CS to add that new use. And that's why we're here this evening. Staff, as you know, is recommending denial of this. We're concerned about the automobile fueling station being located on this site because it is within the well field. There, on page 13 of the staff report, which I'm presuming you have, it does show the map, although it's a little bit difficult to tell exactly where those boundaries are. But I did want to include that. Now, staff would like to make it clear that all those uses in these districts are permitted unless it's otherwise prohibited by the ordinance. And there's a provision in the ordinance that specifically prohibits underground storage tanks. It states, no new underground storage tank shall be permitted in the W1 or W5 wellfield zoning district. In other words, the development of an automobile fueling station could only occur along the right-of-way of the I-465 ramp to the west. And that is shown on the preliminary site plan that they have provided to you. Again, the staff is concerned about the automobile fueling station being in a well field where you get your drinking water. If it is approved this evening, on page 6, there are 5 commitments that staff is requesting. That all the old and existing tanks be removed, including all the piping, the dispensers, and resulting in what they call a clean closure. There shall be no increase in the tank volume of the existing, and I understood there were 3 10,000-gallon tanks on there.
I'd have to go back.
Okay, that's okay. But basically, we're not, what I want is, it's not going to be increase. And all contaminated soil shall be removed and disposed of in accordance with the current regulations. The entire fuels dispensing system shall be upgraded to current standards and regulations. And finally, the proposed underground tanks shall be located in accordance with the conceptual site plan file dated January 7th, 2020. If it's approved, I would request that you include those commitments in your approval. I'll be glad to answer any questions, but staff would like to introduce John Mundell from Mundell & Associates. He's the TQP, and he can answer and explain much more professionally and intelligently than I can about well fields. And he's going to make a few comments, and with that, I will turn it over to him, but we'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have. John.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is John Mundell. I'm with Mundell & Associates. We're under contract with the City of Indianapolis to perform the services of the technically qualified person under the Wellfield Ordinance. We've been doing that for probably the last 24 years. Part of that job is to review all new plan and development within the well fields and to make recommendations for any kind of modifications to those plans that will prevent future groundwater contamination, and ultimately to approve or not approve those plans. The Wellfield Ordinance has undergone a few revisions over years, but the key ones in this case are originally the underground storage tanks, new tanks, were not allowed only in the W1 area of the well field back many years ago. But it could be changed based on the TQP's review and exceptions. I can tell you that that never really ever happened under that, but it was allowed. There were a couple, in all the well fields, there were a couple new developments that did something similar to this one, which were recommending new tanks. Those were reviewed in the past and were rejected. In the last version of the wellfield ordinance that was, implemented a few years ago, it was upgraded, and there was a decision made by the technical groups and the stakeholders that no new underground storage tanks would be allowed in both the W1 and the W5 zones. What's the background for that? There were a couple things, just to kind of update you very quickly. Basically, after reviewing all of the work related to leakage of underground storage tanks in the United States and other communities, it was determined that still a high percentage of tanks leak. They leak, and they've caused problems all over the country. And in fact, in our own county, we've had a number of those leaks that have occurred, and they're known as leaking underground storage tank sites, and they're regulated and followed by the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. The other thing related to that is that, and I'll give you an example, even at this site has leaked twice. Once the original in 2000, I think there was a 2005 report that showed a release that had occurred. The release was not significant, it appeared, and the records indicate that no active remediation had to occur. When the tanks, at least from what we see from the records, tanks were removed this year in January, I believe, or sometime around that time, another release was reported to the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. So between 2005 and now, there's acknowledged that there's some kind of second release that appears to have occurred either, and that release can occur through the tanks themselves or can occur through the piping systems or the connections. So backtrack, one of the reasons the technical group that reviewed this ordinance changed this ordinance was to protect the city's water supply from this potential for leaking tanks. Leaking tanks are also tested every year, but the tests have limitations, and so you have tests that occur on tanks that can detect certain kinds of leaks down to a certain gallon per minute kind of criteria. But even leaks less than that over time can accumulate and cause problems. The point is that we found that these kind of sites can impair future groundwater quality for communities. What we're doing here in well fields is protect the common good. This is your well field water supply. All of your future groundwater and drinking water comes from your groundwater here in Speedway. So that's the importance of protecting it. You're not going to get it from any more withdrawals from any of the major rivers in Marion County. It's going to come from groundwater. In your own groundwater wellhead protection plans over the last several years, the last upgrade, your wellhead protection zones increased. Why was that? Because you have an increase in demand for water in this town. So the size of the well fields that you saw on the diagrams has increased a bit. So this is within the W5 area of that. So with all of that, I guess, said, looking at this particular zoning, or as we support the city's position that it doesn't make sense for the use of new tanks. Let me talk about what's allowed and what's not. So new tanks are allowed, but okay, this is an upgrade, right? We've talked about this is a better system than the existing system. And I would give you that because you're taking old tanks out, putting new tanks in. You would have to upgrade this, even if you put the tanks in exactly where they are. You would have to meet these kind of criteria no matter what you did here, if it was truly an upgrade. The problem we have here is that the tanks have been moved, but the tanks themselves, the underground storage tanks, are on the same parcel, but the UST system is not. And we were talking about system here that includes both the tanks and the piping. And if you look at the diagrams, you can see that the new piping for the system, the dispensers, lies on a second parcel. That goes outside our classical definition of upgrade because you're putting a system on a new parcel that did not have a system before. So if this were one large parcel, you didn't have a street running through it, and you're just putting the tanks in it, the tanks and the tank system, which includes the piping, that would be allowed under the new ordinance. Because you're crossing the pipes, the tanks and the piping systems on, and having them on 2 parcels, that's where we get the limitations. So the bottom line is, even if you were to change the zoning of this system, and then it would go through the review when you have an improvement location, an IPL that comes out that says it has to be reviewed by the TQP, I will have to review this based on the ordinance as it stands now, and the ordinance does not allow me any flexibility in approving this, because it is seen not as just an upgrade, but as a new situation that crosses over the parcels. If we didn't have some limitation on where we could take the system and put it 4 parcels away. So there has to be some kind of definition of where this system goes. So anyway, with that said, I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I'm in a position at this point to support the city's recommendation here because of the limitations of the ordinance.
Any questions from the council?
Were you or your company involved in approving the Get-Go gas stations across Crawfordsville Road?
Yes.
So you did approve it?
Yes, we did, and the reason why that is they got in before the old ordinance changed. And of course, in that review, there were a number of conditions that were required of them in putting their system in. But prior to that, we could allow new systems in W5 zones. But they got their request in before the ordinance changed. The ordinance changed, and so from my standpoint, we're kind of locked into what the ordinance says. But we did go through. We reviewed that. We put in conditions. You can review the conditions we required, which were, I think, pretty solid. But yeah, we were involved in that.
Do they have the same tanks that are being proposed here, or are these tanks that are being proposed, the newer tanks that are being proposed by Max, are they even higher standard?
I'm trying to recall if we've got to the point where we've got the details on the tanks. There's kind of the general
System, I guess system-wide, is this equal or better than what was put in?
It appears to me it would be similar. Well, at least the intent, we haven't seen the specifications and the details of the tanks and all of that, but it looks like the intent is going to be similar to what the Get-Go site was.
You spoke of the second release or the leak. I don't know if that was actually during the removal of the existing tanks. Maybe that was reported. I know they filled them as it would be normal for removal of tanks, but do you know anything about the details of that leak?
We were just able to, at this point, review what the documentation was, where it filled out the forms that said during the removal, and it said there was a release, and it looked like they had checked a box that said new release, which usually don't do that unless you have a distinct release from an earlier release.
Okay, thank you. You made comment that we only have groundwater, and that's actually not true. We have surface water as well.
Well, I was talking about all new increases in your demand are going to come from groundwater. They're not going to come from surface water. So you're right. We have both surface water supply for drinking water and groundwater. But if Speedway grows in the future, that growth and that higher demand for drinking water will come from groundwater.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Misha wants to.
Yeah, just
Yes.
a couple minutes, if you will, to respond. And I don't profess to be an environmental expert, that's why I have this gentleman, and he's going to speak to you about the release issue, but I do know something about the ordinance. And the ordinance provides for an exception to the prohibition against underground storage tanks in the W5, and it doesn't say anything about systems, it talks about tanks. And the 4 requirements are, in no instance shall the replacement or upgrade of an existing underground storage tank result in a net increase in the total volume of storage on site. We meet that one. All replacement or upgraded storage tanks shall require secondary containment. We meet that one. All replacement or upgraded underground storage tanks shall be in full compliance with all applicable state and federal regulations. We meet that one. Annual tightness testing shall be required for all underground storage tanks and piping. We meet that one. So that's the exception. in the ordinance. You raise a good point about the get and go. It's much closer to the wellhead area than this location. And just because it happened to come in under the ordinance change, that should not make a difference in your analysis, in my opinion. I would like Mr. Christensen to talk briefly about the release issue, because I think his report speaks to that.
Thank you. One of the things that I mentioned in my expert report is that in terms of the contaminants, leaking underground storage tank, you're talking about petroleum contaminants. Not all contaminants are equal. In terms of a UST, as I specified in my report, there was a nationwide study, about 4,000 leaking underground storage tanks, and what came out of that study was that essentially 90% of all leaks in terms of gasoline are confined to 450 feet from the release point. It's just the nature of the fate and transport of petroleum products. 99% of all leaking underground storage tanks, essentially the edge of the plume is diminished within 1,400 feet. And what's significant about that is actually the tanks themselves are located, the supply wells are located 3,700 feet south of the site. So in terms of release from the site, if there were some kind of de minimis release from the site, really in terms of the fate and transport of petroleum products, it would be near impossible for that contamination to get to the well field.
Just real quick, Ms. Blackham mentioned, and it's in the staff report, that if you were to recommend approval of this, it'd be subject to 5 commitments. The petitioner is agreeable to those 5 commitments. There's one tweak to the language in number 1, which talks about the cleanup on the old site would result in a clean closure. Clean closure, my understanding, is not really a term of art. We just ask that that language result in a closure that is in compliance with IDEM requirements. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any other questions from the council for the petitioner?
I don't have any questions for Max, for Max, but I do have a question maybe for John, who spoke earlier. The 4 items, the 4 exceptions, I think, that were raised here, are those accurate?
Yes, those would be part of our requirement as well. So if the zoning change would go through and we would be reviewing the full set of plans and all the details, those would be among the commitments we would ask. There may be a few more if it were to get to that point and we were able to approve this. You know, there's a question about whether the tank leaks or not, but you also have to be concerned about delivery of gasoline and gasoline products in the well fields. And what happens if you have a major release during a delivery of gasoline? And so we oftentimes have to consider that. Where is that gasoline going to go? Someone talked about where is the retention area? So there has to be further details related to those kind of releases as well, not just leakage from the tank. So, but yeah, those 4 conditions would also be included in ours as well as a few others if we were able to approve it.
So there can be exceptions in this. It is allowable to approve this.
I said if it were to be approved. It's very clear in the ordinance, and it was written in specifically, no new tanks. So the big question here is this a new tank or an upgrade? If it's determined somehow to be an upgrade through whatever development approach is used, whether it's joining of parcels or whatever, then one could look at it as an upgrade. If it is seen as a new tank, I'm not allowed to approve a new tank in a well field based on what the ordinance has. So that's the real key question here. Is this a new tank or is it just an upgrade?
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Clutter, I close the public hearing.
Yes, sir.
We will now close the public hearing at 7:39 PM. Council?
I'll make a motion that we approve the rezoning from CS or commercial special to commercial special with these proposals that have been made here this evening.
I'll second that.
Subject to the 5 commitments as revised listed in the staff report.
Correct.
Good. Second to what Bob said as well.
Yes.
Okay. There's been a motion and a second to approve the rezoning from a CS to a CS with the amendments mentioned by our town attorney. Any questions from the public? Any further questions or comments from the council? Hearing none, we'll then call for the vote. All those in favor of approving signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Carries 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 5 on our agenda is Ordinance 1325, which is an ordinance amending Ordinance 1322, which relates to the 2020 salary ordinance. Jacob.
Thank you, Mr. President. So there's some language in the current salary ordinance for the year that pertains specifically to the previous clerk treasurer, and we're seeking to clarify that language and avoid any interpretation confusion in the future, and would appreciate your approval.
Mr. President, I move that we approve Ordinance 1325 as presented to us.
There's been a motion, a second, to approve Ordinance 1325 this evening. Any questions from the public? Questions or comments from the council? Hearing none, we'll then call for the vote. All those in favor of approving Ordinance 1325 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. Jacob, we'll continue with you. Approval of claims and utility adjustments.
Thank you, Mr. President. So claims presented to you represent claims from February 22nd through March 6th, so Friday last week, and would appreciate your approval of the claims.
Mr. President, I move that we approve the claims presented to us by our clerk treasurer for February 22nd to March 6th.
I'll second that.
There's been a motion, a second, to approve the claims as presented. Any questions from the public? Questions from the council? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. All those in favor of approving the claims as presented signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Carries 5-0. Utility adjustments, Jacob.
Thank you, Mr. President. Utility adjustments presented are from February 8th through March 6th. There are a few more than usual. It looks like some of the payments were applied by our lockbox provider to some of the wrong accounts. So some late fee payments were charged erroneously. So we made adjustments for that so that people aren't charged unfairly, and would appreciate your approval.
Mr. President, I move that we approve the adjustments presented to us by clerk treasurer.
Second.
Motion to second to approve the utility adjustments as presented. Questions from the public? Questions from the council? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. All those in favor of approving the utility adjustments as presented signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. Jacob, anything else?
Yeah, one more item. I think I have the unenviable position of maybe being the first person in this meeting to mention the word coronavirus. That's been a hot topic. Obviously, we're monitoring the situation closely, and Town Hall certainly remains open to the public and will do so until we're advised otherwise. But I do just want to mention to folks that we have a lot of people. By far, the most common transaction in Town Hall are people coming in to pay their water and sewer bill, which is great. We like seeing people, but potentially in the environment with heightened concerns over the coronavirus. Just want to remind folks that there are several options to pay your bills without physically coming into Town Hall. We have there's a blue drop box in the parking lot here. You don't have to put a stamp on it. You can mail it in. You can pay it online. It's right on our home screen. You can also call Town Hall. We can set you up with automatic billing, which is what I do. You can also call in and pay with a credit card. So there's a lot of options. If you're uncomfortable getting out and about, you can still transact, get your bill paid without having to come in. And it might also be more convenient that way. I believe an email was sent out previously kind of providing more details on how you can maybe pay online and what those different options are. And I'll conclude by just reiterating that town hall is not closed. You can still come in. I'm just trying to help folks realize that there are several options for paying. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is a report from our Department Supervisors, and they're waiting to see who I call first. We will begin with Parks and Recreation Director Tammy Smith.
Good evening. I just wanted to report that summer camp registration is open on our website. You can go to that and see all the great camps that we've got available this year. We have made an addition of a horseshoe camp as well as a cornhole camp, and those are open to ages 8 through adults, so parents can get out there with their kids and participate in that. We're excited about having that opportunity. We also have a camp this year called Stronger Kids. It's a wellness boot camp for children 5th through 8th grade, so we're excited to offer that as well. In addition to our camps, we've got our shelter reservations that can be made online now, in addition to in person. So you can go again to our website, online registration, and be able to reserve your shelters that way at both of our parks. And I want to thank the Lions Club. They are our first sponsor for our summer concerts, so we are still in need of sponsors in order to be able to have 6 concerts this year, but I want to give a shout out to Lions Club for that donation. And then I also want to announce that we were approved for the Federal Land and Water Conservation Fund grant, so I'm real excited. We'll be starting hopefully to get things moving on that here in the near future.
Congrats on that, Tammy.
Thank you.
That's $250,000, right?
Yes, it's a $250,000 grant with a $250,000 match. It is a reimbursement type grant, so we've got 3 years to do it, so we're real excited. So that's all I have.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is our Fire Chief, Bob Fishburne.
We'll see you beat that, Bob.
I may have heard you said that.
Yeah, good evening, council. I just have a couple of things. I want to thank Allison Elementary for inviting me to do the Read Across America last Friday morning. Got to read to Miss Haney / Martin's first grade class there, and I always enjoy being a part of that. This Thursday, we're actually going to participate this year for the first time in the Girl Scout of America's Cookie Drop. We're participating with Wayne Township. Wayne Township takes a ladder over and drops cookies and tries to get it into bowls of milk, and Weber Grill sponsors it, and it's to encourage Girl Scouts and the sale of cookies, and it's like a public safety appreciation day. So they've asked us to participate. We're going to be doing that. We will be completing all of our work performance evaluations this week with the fire department, and that entails going over to the Wayne Township training facility. And then I wanted to piggyback on something that Jacob said. So we've gotten a lot of phone calls about coronavirus. Let me just say that I'm an advanced EMT. I'm an EMT. And we are encouraging people to look at the Indiana Department of Health, the CDC websites. I know for a fact that Talk of the Town is actually going to put on their front page different places where you can get information about the situation. Many of you I know heard about the press conference that they had with Avon Schools in Hendricks County today. I thought that was probably one of the most informative YouTube teleconferences, and you can go on and live stream that, but they gave some really good information. A lot of the call lines are being bombarded by questions that can be answered just by going online. And so please, utilize those sources. We are working hard with Indianapolis EMS to protect our guys, and we actually have a meeting tomorrow morning with them and the other surrounding EMS chiefs and operations chiefs, just so that we know how to protect our guys from responding to flu-like symptoms and all of those sorts of things. And we're adjusting our SOPs in accordance with what they recommend. Our medical direction comes from IEMS. So we appreciate your phone calls, but please, by all means, seek out your answers, with the agencies that do that. So with that, that's all I have.
Chief, I was going to make comments on it in my comments, but while you're talking about it, what are the things that the public can do to minimize their risks?
Well, I'm not an expert, but from what I've listened to, it is just wash your hands and clean your surfaces. It doesn't live for very long outside of a human host, and so it's just common sense sort of things. And 85% of the public is fairly safe from this virus, so you have to use common sense when going to a large event with a lot of people, and within 5 or 6 feet away from someone, it's not transmittable. All of those sorts of things are just common sense things. But I'm not an expert on it. These are just things that I've learned from listening and paying attention to what's out there in the media.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Chief. Rob, we'll have you come up to make seating go. Chief, you're welcome. For our Public Works report, Rob Whitnight.
Yeah, good evening, council. We'll start off with the wastewater plant. Their plant, the SCADA system was down for 5 days, and they've had some issues with that, and it's caused numerous problems throughout the plant, obviously, because everything's connected through that system. And then when that was down, they had a blockage in the tank, or in the line that goes to the tanks, treatment tanks. The street department tried to get it with our equipment, too large of equipment, so they had to get commercial sewer over to get that line unplugged. They're back being able to use those tanks again. The digester, we had one of the 3 digesters failed and is out of service and has been evaluated and needed to be extensively rebuilt, so it's a major process there. But some good news is the influence screen is working well and is improving the operations of the plant. And then on to water. They're wrapping up the spring maintenance for surface water plant. They're changing all the oil in the pumps. They're also getting the new change in sprockets. They've been ordered for the flock basin paddles in the surface plant. It's been 50 years since they've been changed, so it's a big improvement for that.
That's a long time.
And they're just working on some scheduling for their 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week staffing. So they'll have a licensed water operator there 24/7. And as far as the street department, typical weather events, we got maintenance going on all the time. Sign maintenance was today. Just a little bit of information. Yard waste starts the 7th of April. See a lot of stuff out. People are getting excited. Nice weather. So the 7th of April is when that starts. And that's all I've got.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Police Chief Jim Campbell.
For the record, I read to the 2nd grade. I'm working with Bob to try to get him up to where he can.
That's the level that I graduated.
Pretty much.
You have any comments on cookies?
I'm going to hold that one.
Dave has many.
I'm holding mine too.
All right.
I second that, Chief.
Good deal. Our public safety meeting tomorrow at 1:30. It's a public meeting if people are interested in, and a lot of these are community folks that want to know more about, race events and activities in May. A lot of them want to know about parking, traffic, and those kinds of things. The other bit of news there is we do finally have a SEER 2 coordinator, Andrew Campion, who is the assistant agent in charge of the Secret Service. Most of you guys knew our prior was the SAC, Paul Dvorak. So, he's got a pretty good background and, will fit right in. His assistant is Aaron Batt, who is a director of TSA, at our airport. So between those 2 guys, we got a pretty good federal team to work with us during the month of May. We're finishing up a promotion process for sergeant and lieutenant. We should have the results of those, and we have a vacancy. So, we're pretty interested in moving forward. The other one is an applicant process. We've got about 3 staffing openings that came as a little bit of a surprise to us. So we're going to be working real hard to try to get some kind of a process and, try to get those vacancies filled. 3 down on our staff is a pretty good hit. The only other one is you have some light reading that was provided to you. Just off the top, there's 25,659 incidents that we dealt with last year. We made 1,669 arrests, and we issued 8,016 tickets. So I know we get a lot of issues with traffic, but that's not a bad number.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you, Chief.
Great.
Our Economic Development Director, Tim Gropp. See, Tim, you were first on the list and you thought you were going to.
I appreciate you saving the best for last.
Yeah. Oh, man.
I'm going to pay for that one. Just a quick update on a few projects. Founders Square, we obviously talked a little bit about tonight, but several different aspects going. As with every project, we have our bumps, its development. But we anticipate some infrastructure movement this week. Both IPL and AT&T should be moving some infrastructure out of the way so we can start with more of the dirt work and the pond excavation. In addition, permits were picked up today for the Circle K demolition. So we should see those buildings starting to go down this week as well, so that's exciting. In between that, we're doing some investigation into the dirt out there. There was some debris found in there, and we're just trying to wrap our head around that process as well as the scope of that work. So we're a little bit behind on where we were hoping to be as far as earthwork on the sites, but we're trying not to fall too far behind, so we're trying to make some decisions and get moving on that. But you should see a lot of activity out at Founders Square, weather pending. If the rain holds off, we should be able to get out there. Then we're also might be a shift on getting into some of the utility work as well as starting to work on some of the intersection. Beyond that, we did have an on-site meeting at 10th and Polko. There's still a little bit of work to do there on the cleanup in that area. We were able to get the fence ordered finally. There's about a 4-week wait time on that. So again, they'll come back in the spring and do some finish-up work, but in the hopefully around April, mid-April, the fencing will go around that, and we're getting close to that project being completed as well. Wilshaw, there is progress being made there. We continue to be in conversation with the developer. The next step in the process, it seems that they've gotten their financing figured out. They're working through some of the closing aspects of that and doing all the paperwork. They promised to provide us that as soon as it's completed. Beyond that, the next step will be structural integrity work, where they'll come out and just inspect what's already there. The developer, that should be happening hopefully soon. We're hoping that they'll be back on site sooner than later. But we should see a little bit of activity there. Hopefully, I can't give you an exact date, don't have exact dates, but it seemed promising. As well as the developer has committed to get on site and clean up the site. Just clean up some of the signage, fix some of the fencing, clean up some of the material there, as well as just knock down the weeds, everything like that. That was something we had heard from our Main Street business owners. We relayed that message, and they said they get out there hopefully this week to do that. So we'll keep you posted as more firm dates and progress is made, but it seems like we're hopefully starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel on that project. Beyond that, we're working on a lot of behind-the-scenes planning aspects to other projects.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. Next is a report from our council members and Councilor Eileen Fisher.
I have nothing this evening. Thank you.
Councilor Dan Jensen.
I wanted to thank everybody who came out to the Lions Pancake Breakfast. I think we had a record number of people, and I know the Lions give a lot of money to a lot of different organizations here in town, so I wanted to thank everybody for coming out to that. On March 19th, the Cunningham Park Neighborhood Association is meeting at McAllister's Deli from 6 to 8 p.m. Frank Merritt's kind of puts this on and about once a quarter. So if you'd like to, I'll be there if you'd like to come out and ask questions and, get together, meet with your neighbors. love to see you out there.
Thank you. Counselor Gary Rakes.
Thanks for Dan's report. I was going to mention the pancake breakfast, but I think last time there was a challenge to Vince on
Yeah,
the number of
he
pancakes.
failed.
How did he do?
He did not. How many pancakes did you eat, Vince?
Like 2.
Okay, so that's my only.
There was a sausage in between the pancakes.
Pigs in a blanket.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. I'm good. Thank you.
Next is our Vice President, Ben Snoblet.
I have nothing to report at this time.
And the final is my report, and I'd like to mention that we've extended the deadline for our town manager process through this Friday. For information on that, please visit the town website. And our high school is going to have a musical this Friday, Saturday. It is The Music Man, and I think well over half of the student population, no?
20%.
Okay, I was close. I was close. 20% of the high school is involved with it. It's going to be phenomenal. I haven't seen it, but I've heard, because I may have a kid that's involved with it. That is Friday at 7, Saturday at 2 and 7, so I'd encourage you all to go out and see that. And unless we hear anything else, I will adjourn the meeting at 8:01.